Hi again then guys, and welcome to another Special Projects custom build, and this particular build is, as with some of the others, an imitation, if you will, of real life rather than a replica of it, because of course there are actual racing versions of the car in question, the BMW 2002 Turbo, but that's not what we're replicating. We're making more of a fictionalized version of what that could feel like were it on Gran Turismo. So we've lowered the centre of gravity, of course lowered the weight, but at the same time, we're not running huge amounts of power. More power, definitely, but not ridiculous amounts, and as such, the PP level isn't overly high. Now, as far as the visuals, I have, as you can see, changed up the rims. I can't recall the name of these wheels, but they're pretty easy to find. They're the kind of steel-looking wheels. Again, classic racing look. And I've gone for those in the biggest size you can get, which still doesn't look ridiculously big, and obviously that's down to personal preference. As far as the colour, again, it's totally down to you. I've gone for Scotia White for the body itself, and that comes from the older shape Mitsubishi Evo, and for the rims and also the brakes, I've gone for Ebony Black, which comes from the Jaguar S-Type. And that's it for the visuals. So, of course, next up is the mechanical side of things, and then finally, as we always do, we'll take it out on, of course, a racing circuit to see if it can actually pull off being a race car. Now, as with the tuning on many of my other custom builds, it's very much down to personal preference as to what you choose to do with the car, different amounts of weight, different power, of course different tyres, all that kind of stuff. And the reason why I say that is because some people do consider certain tyres in particular, stuff like that, to be overkill, if you will, on certain cars. And that could certainly be the case for some people with this one. You don't need racing tyres on this vehicle, but it's part of the image. Of course, an actual race car would have, of course, racing tyres, so we've gone for racing tyres. At the same time, racing hards, just to keep it a little bit interesting. As far as the brakes, again, we are making kind of a race car, so I have upgraded those. As far as suspension, I've lowered the ride height as far as it can go. It's still not scraping the floor low, but it's pretty low. As far as springs, we've increased those to 725 and 550 on the stiffness, dampers to 5, anti-roll to 4, so it's a pretty stiff setup overall. I do have a bit of camber on this one, surprisingly. It's one of the very, very few tunes which I do have camber on, and it's not necessarily just due to handling. It does of course help handling, it's not essential, but it does help. Mostly though I've done it for the visuals, because often those older race cars will have a much lower, cambered out, chunky stance, and that's what I wanted this car to have. I've gone for neutral toe though, as we usually would. We'll come back to the gearbox in just a second. As far as the diff, I've opted for the highest initial torque, lowest acceleration and braking, but of course the diff is highly down to personal preference, so you could try those settings. If you already know what works better for you, then by all means go for that, or as kind of a middle ground between the two, just mess around and find out what you like working with. As far as power, we do have an oil change, and then I've gone for the Stage 3 engine tune and the intake tuning. So as I said, we're not running silly amounts of power. It's a believable amount of power. As far as weight, we are running the full weight loss package, of course, and I've just added a tiny 5 kilo ballast to round us off to 450 pp, and I've put that all the way to the front for the same reason, and also to fractionally improve the weight distribution. And finally, for the gearbox, of course it's not a top-end tune, and this gearbox pretty much works perfectly for this car for when you need acceleration and top-end performance. Of course, for its power and PP level, it's not going to be hitting 200 miles per hour anytime soon, but it can do around 150 or so, a little bit more with draft. As you can see, we have an auto setting of 149, then for the individual gears, 3.3, 2.2, 1.6, 1225, 1, and I've opted for a final drive of 3. That pretty much works perfectly for the acceleration and top-end performance that you get from this car. You've got a tiny bit of draft potential, you're not hitting the red line, so if you need it to have a bit more draft potential, you can lower that a bit more, but it's not really a car that you'd usually need that with. So overall, that's what I've done. And as I said, of course, there is plenty of room for personal variation, but all that remains to do is take the car, of course, out on a racetrack. I personally think that it's kind of a shame that vehicles on Gran Turismo like this not only aren't premium for the moment, but also, even when they are, they don't have the most amazing visual upgrades. And obviously you could say that about a lot of cars on Gran Turismo, but with these older vehicles, especially compact ones like the BMW 2002, the Ford Cortina, the Lotus Cortina, the old Skylines, they have such a good look to them when they're lowered, with the even more blistered arches, intakes, bits and bobs hanging off of the car. They look so cool like that. So it's a shame that you can't do that, but we work with what we've got, and at least the stance of the car, how low it is, how it piles through the corners, it looks good. It looks the part. It looks like an interpretation of a race car. It's certainly very quick, as you'd expect, through the corners. In a straight line, not as much, but at the same time, it's not slow. For the 450 pp level, you are running good numbers. So overall, if you decide to use this tune, or of course some variation of it, I hope you have a lot of fun with it, and potentially find it enjoyable for seasonal events or online racing as well. It's certainly capable of that. So if you'd like to check out other customs and replicas like this, you can click through to the playlist at the end of this video, or sub down below for more like it. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.